Hello, I'm Nigel Morris Cotterill, and this is Financial Crime Basics from FinCrime TV. In this episode, what are terrorism, terrorist financing, and providing material support for terrorism? The core definition of terrorism is very clear. It is the use or threat of serious harm to a person, institution of government, or society with the intention to influence the decision of government for political, religious, or ideological reasons. The UK government's explanation of terrorism is as follows. It relates to the Terrorism Act 2000, as amended several times last quarter of a century. Terrorism is defined in the Act as the use or threat which involves serious violence against a person, involves serious damage to property, endangers a person's life other than that of the person committing the act, creates a serious risk to the health or safety of the public or a section of the public, or is designed seriously to interfere with or seriously disrupt an electronic system. The use or threat of such action must be designed to influence the government or an international governmental organization, or to intimidate the public or a section of the public, and be undertaken for the purpose of advancing a political, religious, racial, or ideological cause. But that definition is blurred because each country modifies it to suit their own purposes and often includes specific conduct which does not fall within that core definition. That additional conduct often includes the actions of political activists, especially in countries that do not actively prosecute the law of sedition. In fact, for example, anti-terrorism laws are used to plug a hole between terrorism and treason. For example, in some countries, there are laws that make it a terrorist offence to enter a restricted zone at a civilian airport. Such actions are not classified as terrorism per se, but they are classified as a, quote, terrorist offence. What terrorism is not, despite the way that Hollywood portrays it, is the use of extreme violence or threat of violence in the pursuit of a crime with no political or ideological purpose. The term political is often interpreted by different courts in different ways, and often those interpretations are themselves political. This means that it is difficult to decide on the boundaries of the definition. Some countries, for example the USA, draw a distinction between domestic and foreign terrorism, but this is not a distinction that is widely adopted. In any event, for the purposes of reporting suspicions relating to terrorism, this distinction is one for law enforcement to make, not for the person making a report. Why? Because in the real world, no one cares who blew up a building or what their politics are until trial. The only thing they want is for that person to get caught, and at the time the report is submitted, that trial is a long way into the future. Also, everyone wants anyone who helped that person to blow up that building to be punished as well. And that's what's behind the offence of terrorist financing. A significant portion of the money that finds its way into the support of terrorism is money that is legitimately in the hands of persons, some of whom know it will be used for that purpose. But it is thought, in the vast majority of cases, the people who give money to a cause they believe in without any idea that the money will be used for purposes of terrorism. This money is rarely, quote, dirty, in the sense that it is the proceeds of criminal conduct in the hands of the donor. This has led to the explanation that it is turning clean money into dirty money, because once it's used in connection with terrorism, it then becomes illegal. But it is not laundered. Nevertheless, some people have termed it as reverse money laundering, which is a phrase that doesn't actually make any sense, so it shouldn't be used. The USA's term, providing material support for terrorism, is the best term in use. Other countries use variations on the term terrorist financing, but in practice expand that term to closely resemble the USA's. So what does it mean? Again, like the definition of terrorism, there is a core meaning that countries vary. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to adopt what the USA means by material and material support, because it's very comprehensive. Your country's definitions may not be quite so comprehensive. The US Code says at section 2339A, the term material support or resources means any property, tangible or intangible, or service, including currency or monetary instruments or financial securities, financial services, lodging, training, expert advice or assistance, safe houses, false documentation or identification, communications equipment, facilities, weapons, lethal substances, explosives, personnel, one or more individuals who may be or may include oneself, and transport, but except medicine or religious materials. The term training means instruction or teaching designed to impart a specific skill as opposed to general knowledge. And the term expert advice or assistance means advice or assistance derived from scientific, technical, or other specialized knowledge. So what can we take from that? It's simply this. Terrorism is very, very cheap to do. Even spectacular events such as the attacks on New York and other parts of the USA in September 2001 cost, in total, only about $300,000. This was something that the USA did not understand, and in the days immediately after those attacks, American officials were talking about as much as $6 million. I and my team estimated it to be at about $250,000. It took months of investigation, understanding the money flows and re-estimation after re-estimation for the figure to come close to something representative. Car bombs are very cheap. Indeed, in Indonesia, those responsible for the bomb at a hotel in Jakarta were caught because they bought a van too far away from the city where they lived for a price that the dealer thought was too high for the people who bought it. Passed on information to authorities, and they were caught. In the UK, in the days of terrorism in London and elsewhere, the van would cost less than the amount of a daily withdrawal limit from an ATM. That was £200. But in India, being cheap reached a new level when bombers carrying a bomb in a cardboard box told a taxi driver to take them to a crowded market, then told him to run away because they were about to blow up his car. So ironically, it's not the money that is the important thing about material support. It's the infrastructure. Every attack requires insertion, that is, the terrorist has to arrive in the territory, execution, that is, the actual terrorist act, and extraction, that is, getting the terrorist out of the territory and to safety. That requires transport, accommodation, in fact, everything from clothing to food. These are often provided by sympathizers. We hear much of terrorist cells and so-called lone wolves, but in reality, most terrorism at the point of delivery, so to speak, is neither. The image of a group of usually young men sitting around making detailed plans is not the norm until the hours before an attack. That's not to say that it never happens, but someone letting a cousin, for example, stay with them for a while, often with no knowledge of what is planned, is far more common. So while there are financial indicators, for example, unusual purchases of the materials to be used, it is not financial intelligence that indicates suspicious activity for terrorism. Human intelligence, that is, identifying suspicious changes in lifestyle, are more visible indicators, and usually those come after the event. Mr. X had a young man staying with him, and I saw him leave on the morning of the attack, and I haven't seen him since, is an example. But having said that, in one case in the UK, an elderly woman who liked peeping out from behind her curtains saw a group of young men move into a house over the road. Over a period of days, she watched them carry into the house various things, including sacks of chapati flour and bottles of hairdresser's bleach, also known as hydrogen peroxide. She didn't know what they could be used for, but with the UK in a well-publicized state of heightened security, she phoned the police. They found advanced preparation for making bombs. Security forces around the world openly admit they have an impossible job and they depend on help from people, and because everyone is somewhat random, sometimes whether they stop a terrorist act comes down to dumb luck. As a result, often the authorities are chasing facts after the event, and it is then that material support is most easily identified. So banks and the like are required to identify monies that may be used for terrorism, but they're swimming against the tide when it comes to individual attacks. But when we consider organized, centralized, coordinated terrorism, there's an entirely different position. Organized paramilitary and terrorist groups raise funds through a variety of methods, including extortion and apparently proper businesses. So-called protection rackets are a favorite. It's no coincidence that this looks like ordinary organized crime, especially when it's funded through the most favorite idea, the most favorite product, which is drugs. Anything like drugs, for example, people trafficking and the like, all contribute. A very significant proportion of what is termed terrorism is actually organized crime, overlaid with a notional religious or political message. But that's enough for it to be branded terrorism rather than a less glamorous crime. Finally, I should mention the use of charities and similar organizations. Often, such organizations are proscribed. That means that to belong to or support them is illegal, and internationally, they are made subject to sanctions. Charities often operate on the margins of legality. For example, some years ago, one well-known charity admitted that it smuggled portable radios into an area of Myanmar to a district that the then government blocked all access to, and took steps to prevent the residents receiving communications from the outside world. Another admitted using Hawala to send money to its teams in remote areas of a country with no effective banking system. A third was the subject of a series of cases in the USA over its collecting monies for humanitarian aid in Palestine, where the receiving party was related to a proscribed organization. Some charities support the families of convicted terrorists, and some countries see this as illegal. In 2002, as the USA was waking up to the issues presented by terrorism, the Senator Evan Bayh said, "Unfortunately, charities are an important part of the financing picture." He went on to say that a US attorney in the Northern District of Alabama had told him that he was investigating 2 cases of the misuse of charities and the siphoning of funds to support Al-Qaeda. The senator said, "If it is going on in smaller counties in northern Indiana, it must be going on in a lot of places in addition to that, not just the large metropolitan areas. That may give you some indication of just the extent of the challenge that we face. It is particularly galling and outrageous when funds generated in the United States by what I assume are predominantly legal and patriotic US citizens are being diverted." He made the nature of the problem clear. Islamic charities collect millions of dollars every year, and millions more are granted to development projects by the World Bank, USAID, and other United States and international funds through non-governmental organizations. While the majority of this funding is used for benevolent causes, some of it, unfortunately, is diverted to terrorists, either by design or through the exploitation of otherwise legitimate organizations. In the UK, for many years, funds donated in the USA to charitable enterprises in Ireland and Northern Ireland were used to support, directly or indirectly, terrorist activity. One last word from US Senator Bayh. Legitimate charities have been exploited when their field operations have been infiltrated by terrorist elements, particularly in areas of conflict. There are links to all the documents I've referred to in the notes below this video. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to follow, like, and share, and of course, keep watching FinCrime TV.